Bluebird, collected by Patrick Chamoiseau, told by Jan Blake. This story is from Martinique. Once upon a time there was an old woman who lived on her own in the forest. She lived in a little house. There weren't many neighbours around her. There was one woman, though. She lived in a house not far from where our old woman lived. Our old woman was very kind and very gentle. The neighbour, however, was very sharp. She used hot, sharp words, and she didn't think very much about the things she was saying to other people that could hurt their feelings. One day, the old lady, the one that we like, was sitting by the river, thinking about how her life used to be when she was young, when her child was around. And she was thinking about this when she heard a rustling in the trees. She walked towards the trees, and something fell from the trees onto the ground. She looked, and she saw that it was a blue bird with an injured wing. She picked the bird up and she said, "Oh, you poor thing," she said. "Don't worry, I can help you." The bird knew that this woman was a kind woman. It didn't struggle, and she took it home. When she got home, she got some special oils, and she rubbed the oils onto the bird's wing. She fed it tiny little scraps of bread. She lay on the bed beside her. At night, the bird slept as close to her as it could, and in the morning, she rubbed more oil onto the bird's wing, and she began to sing. Here stands a bluebird, tra-la-la-la. Here stands a bluebird, tra-la-la-la. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Now show me emotion, tra-la-la-la. Show me emotion, tra-la-la-la. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Now dance around the ocean, tra-la-la-la. Dance around the ocean, tra-la-la-la. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. For 7 days, she tended to that bird. For 7 days, she sang to the bird, and each day the bird got stronger and stronger and stronger, until one morning she woke up and the bird was not on the pillow beside her. The bird was sitting up on the lintel above the door, and that's when she knew that the bird was ready to go home. And so she said to the bird, "Well, it grieves my heart to see you go because I've been so lonely, but I thank you for your company. You probably want to go home to your family now." She offered her finger. The bird jumped down from the lintel onto her finger. She opened the door. She went outside. She kissed the bird gently on the beak and she said, "Goodbye." And the bird seemed to nod its head as a farewell, and then he was gone, up, up, up into the sky. And the lady, the old lady, the kind-hearted old lady, she was making her way back into the house with a heavy heart when she heard the bird trilling above her head. She looked up, and the bird had something in its beak, which it let go. It dropped straight into her hand. When she looked, she noticed it was a pumpkin seed. "Thank you," she said to the bird. The bird circled around her head 3 times and then flew away. And the old lady, she took that pumpkin seed and she buried it. And every day she watered it. Every day she spoke loving words to the pumpkin seed and it began to shoot. And then it grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it was so big that she knew it was time to cut it. She knew that it was ripe. So she went into the house and she took a knife and very carefully, very gently, she cut the pumpkin from its stalk and took it into the house. And she imagined all the different things she could make with that pumpkin. She could make pumpkin risotto. She could make pumpkin pie. She could roast the pumpkin and have it with some nice stewed fish. All the different recipes were going through her head when she went for the knife. She pierced the skin of the pumpkin and she cut all the way through till it fell in 2 halves. But to her surprise, instead of finding pumpkin seeds and the yellow flesh of a pumpkin, she found food of every description. Imagine all the different foods that were in that pumpkin. Anything that you can imagine right now, that's what was in the pumpkin shell. All the favorite foods you like to eat and that she liked to eat were in that pumpkin shell. She was delighted. She took a knife and she took a fork and she took a spoon and she began to eat and eat and eat and eat. And as she was eating, she realized this is far too much food for one person. I know, I'll share it with my neighbor. And so she left off from eating and she took the other half of the pumpkin out of the door and along to her neighbor. She knocked on the door. The neighbor said, "Yes, what do you want?" She said, "Good afternoon, neighbor. I've come to bring you this gift." The neighbor saw the pumpkin that was filled with delicious things to eat. And she said, "Where did you get this?" And so the kind old lady told the nasty neighbor exactly how she'd found the bird and about the pumpkin seed and how everything had come because of her own kindness. "Thank you very much," said the neighbor, and slammed the door in her face. And as she took that pumpkin into the house, and as she began to eat the food, she began to imagine how much she could get if she could find a blue bird with a broken wing. The next morning, the nasty neighbor set out. She set out to the river. She set out to the tree. And as she approached the tree, she saw a blue bird pecking at the roots, a blue bird that was fully healed. But she wanted a broken blue bird so that she could show her version of kindness. She looked around for something. I'm sorry to say she did. She looked around for a stick, and whack! That poor blue bird had a broken wing. And that nasty neighbor, she grabbed that bird, she took it home, she threw it on the floor in the corner. She didn't use healing oils. Every day she would rub some dirty water from her washing onto the bird's wing. And after 7 days, no care, no love, she had enough. She opened the door and she threw the bird out. She said, "Go on, go and bring me my treasure." The bird, with its wing not fully healed, flew as high as it possibly could and then disappeared. The nasty neighbor waited and waited and waited, and eventually the bird came back and dropped a pumpkin seed into her hand. "About time," said the neighbor. And she planted the seed, but she didn't water it with love and kindness the way the nice neighbor did. She just threw the wastewater from her washing onto the pumpkin seed. It grew. It grew bigger and bigger. In fact, it grew 10 times bigger than the nice neighbor's pumpkin. When she was sure it was full of delicious things to eat and drink, she took a knife, she pierced the skin, she cut, and it fell in two halves. But instead of there being delicious things to eat, there were creepy crawlies of all kinds. There were cockroaches, there were mosquitoes, there were centipedes, there were beetles, all the horrible, creepy, crawly things that you don't want to see in your pumpkin were inside her pumpkin. And they began to crawl over the side of the pumpkin and they all began to head towards her. She didn't like creepy crawlies, so she had to run, and they chased her and chased her all the way back to the river. All the creepy crawlies chased her. She dived into the river and she swam away, probably into another story. But the nice neighbor, the kind old lady, every day, the half of the pumpkin that she had was refilled with delicious things to eat and drink. And every so often, she was visited by a blue bird, and she would sing, "There stands a bluebird, tra-la-la-la. There stands a bluebird, tra-la-la-la. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea. Give me sugar, coffee, and tea." And that's the end of that story.